The question I had a few episodes ago was about the world's southernmost city. Now it's time to take on the world's northernmost city. What if I told you that the debate over that one is similar to that in the South? It kind of depends on your definition of a city, if we're going to be absolutely honest here. And so I'm going to break this down. We're going to start with the very northernmost settlement of any kind in the world. That's actually Ny-Ålesund, Norway, which is on the island archipelago of Svalbard. It's a scientific settlement, so it doesn't really have a civilian purpose, but it is a scientific settlement, and population fluctuates depending on season, just like most polar locations. It is at about 79 degrees north latitude, and it is a scientific settlement with a population of about 30 in the wintertime and about 150 in the summertime, depending on specific month of the year. So Ny-Ålesund is the world's northernmost settlement of any kind. Now, the world's northernmost civilian town is on the same island, also on Svalbard, and of course that is Longyearbyen, and that is the northernmost civilian settlement in the world at about 78 degrees north and a population of about 2,400. The entire island of Svalbard is actually habitable despite its extreme northern latitude and only being a few hundred miles south of the North Pole. The reason, of course, is the North Atlantic Current, which comes from the southwest, comes from the North American mainland, and basically follows a path that's an extension of the American Gulf Stream, which pushes warm air from the southern part of the Atlantic Ocean and pushes it from Caribbean northwards towards these higher latitudes on the west coast of Norway. And it does branch up to Svalbard. Of course, it's not carrying tropical air by this point, but it's still enough to be a moderating force, and it keeps the island, for all intents and purposes, relatively mild. Their winters are actually warmer than Minnesota's in the United States, for reference, and definitely warmer than Alaska's. So for a reference point, it's going to be kind of a barometer on where to draw that line. Now, Longyearbyen in particular is a very important scientific spot in its own right, in that a lot of studies of climate change occur there because the temperatures on Svalbard are increasing relatively rapidly. And so Svalbard ports are also generally ice-free, so it is possible to ship goods there. And cruises do occasionally sail to these locations. And so Longyearbyen is the world's northernmost civilian town. Now, if we go up in population here, the world's northernmost city of 50,000 or greater is actually Tromsø, Norway, which is, again, on the west coast of the Norwegian mainland in the northern area called Troms County. And it's at about 66 degrees north, so it is north of the Arctic Circle. And it's a substantial cultural town and quite lively. So that is the world's northernmost city of that particular population. The world's northernmost settlement of over 10,000 people is also in Norway on that western coast, but it is where the northern tip of Norway is, closer to what is called the North Cape, and that is the town of Hammerfest. It is a population of about 11,000, and it's at about 71 degrees north, so at about the same latitude as the northern tip of the Norwegian mainland, which is also North Cape. It's a little bit further east of Hammerfest. So Hammerfest is the northernmost town of over 10,000 in the world, and it kind of reaches by where Norway arches east, and it's in the northernmost county in Norway, which is called Finnmark. And so Hammerfest is the world's northernmost town of 10,000. The world's northernmost metropolitan area of over 1 million people is also in the Scandinavian countries, but this one's in Sweden, and of course that is Stockholm. Metropolitan population of a little bit over 1 million residents. It is the northernmost city with a metro rail line or a subway. And so that is the world's northernmost city of over 1 million residents. Just barely to the south of that is the world's northernmost metropolitan area of multiple millions of people. That is St. Petersburg, Russia. And Again, northwesternmost corner of the Russian mainland, and it is the second largest city in the Russian Federation. So St. Petersburg is the northernmost, what you would really call a truly major city. Although Stockholm, by most accounts, is a major city in its own right. But it's just not quite nearly as larger in scope as St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg, as most of you would probably recognize who have read up on your history, used to be called Leningrad. It was named after Vladimir Lenin, but somewhere around the 1990s, just shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, it restored its historic name, which was named for Peter the Great, hence St. Petersburg. And so St. Petersburg is the second largest city in the Russian Federation. It is also home to Russia's tallest skyscraper, believe it or not, the Lakhta Tower. And this is about an 80-story tower, office tower. It is the tallest in all of the Russian Federation. It is not in downtown St. Petersburg. Downtown St. Petersburg is actually a very traditional European urban hub, which means that it doesn't really have any Western-style skyscrapers. So the tallest building in St. Petersburg is actually outside of the downtown. And so, but St. Petersburg is the northernmost major multi-million population metropolis in the world. So they get that particular bragging rights on that one. Now, I'm going to kind of go backwards a little bit, and I'm going to try for the northernmost mid-sized population center, so a mid-sized city, population clocking at around 279,000, is Russia's northernmost ice-free port, which is Murmansk. Murmansk is, again, northwestern corner, close to 70 degrees north latitude, but it is ice-free year-round for the same reason that Tromsø and Longyearbyen are, and that is the North Atlantic Current. But it actually does open to the Arctic Ocean. And so Murmansk is an Arctic port, and with the advent of climate change, this could become a substantial asset to the Russian Federation somewhere down the line, or even not too far down the line. You know, particularly in a world where the Arctic Ocean the ice cap does entirely melt in the summer months, which is probably about 20 to 30 years out at this point. And when we reach that point, you know, of course, Russia's already angling heavily to establish itself in the Arctic, and they have the geographic location to do it. It's basically between them, the United States, and really Norway at this point. But I believe that there are substantial oil reserves in the Arctic under the ice cap at the present. So those are the northernmost settlements of any kind. The northernmost temporary settlement, so this doesn't fall under city and doesn't really cooperate with this video. So the northernmost temporary settlement in the world is actually an ice camp, also by the Russians, speaking of establishing themselves in the Arctic. This is the ice camp called Barneo, and it's like a little less than 60 miles away from the North Pole when it's established during the spring months, with a scientific population of around 50 between March and, say, July. I mean, not even July, March and May. But let's say the Arctic ice cap does start disappearing in the summertime, this ice camp will be impossible to set up entirely. So that's the wild card entry here. It's not really a settlement of any kind. So the northernmost population-wise settlement of any kind in the world is now Ålesund, Svalbard, Norway. At 79 degrees north, population fluctuating between 30 and 150. But again, not a civilian town. So the northernmost civilian settlement in the world, to settle the question once and for all, I believe is Longyearbyen, Norway. And the northernmost major metropolis in the world is St. Petersburg, Russia. The northernmost substantial city of any kind is Murmansk, Russia. And the northernmost metropolitan area in the world is Stockholm, Sweden. Not too far south of Stockholm is another Scandinavian city, which is of course Oslo. But the northernmost international airport in the world is at Stockholm. The northernmost commercial air access of any kind is at Longyearbyen. Longyearbyen does have a commercial airport with daily flights between Longyearbyen and Tromsø as well as Oslo. Non-stop flights, mind you. So you can catch a non-stop flight from... if you can get to Oslo, you can get a non-stop flight from Oslo all the way up to Longyearbyen, which of course is about a 1,000-kilometer flight. I believe there are daily flights on this route, and the Norwegian flag carrier SAS runs these flights. So you can get there. Again, Longyearbyen and Svalbard are also governed by the Svalbard Treaty. You do not need a visa to fly there. However, you do need a visa to fly through Oslo and Gardermoen Airport, as well as Tromsø Airport. You do need a visa to transit through the Norwegian mainland. So you do eventually need a visa to get to Longyearbyen, despite Svalbard's status as a visa-free zone. And of course that means it's not in the Schengen zone, which is the European Union's free transit zone, which will also allow you to get, if you are European, you actually can reach Longyearbyen visa-free, because if you're in the Schengen zone, you can reach Oslo. And if you reach Oslo, then you can get that visa-free flight to Longyearbyen. But if you're anywhere else in the world, including North or South America or Asia, tough luck. But anyway, those are the lists of the northernmost settlements in the world. Some other northernmosts, we're going outside of settlements. The northernmost ATM in the world is also at Longyearbyen. The northernmost high school football program in the world, ESPN has done a documentary on this one. It's at Utqiagvik, Alaska, which also used to be called Barrow. The high school is still called Barrow High School. But again, like some other settlements in the Arctic, this name change was actually done because Barrow has always been majority Inuit. And so the native Inuit population agreed to change the name back to its traditional name of Utqiagvik. Iqaluit Nunavut also falls under this category. That is the northernmost territorial capital of Canada. Actually, no, it's not. But it's the most isolated territorial capital of Canada. The northernmost one is actually Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. And the northernmost major mountain in Canada, of course, is, I've mentioned before, on Ellesmere Island, called Barbeau Peak. The northernmost bank in the United States is also at Utqiagvik. A Wells Fargo branch is there. There's also the northernmost settlement in the United States. The northernmost island in the world is off the shore of Greenland. I've mentioned this before on the channel. It's Coffee Club Island, or Coffee Club Island, named by Robert Peary, who was also originally credited being the first to reach the North Pole. But he also verifiably did reach this island first. The northernmost point of land in the world is Coffee Club Island. There are various temporary gravel banks that have surfaced that are north of Coffee Club, but they generally do not count because they're considered to be shifting, and they are underwater at high tide most of the time. And so they're moving gravel banks, and so they will sink underneath sea level. And so they're not permanent ones. But Coffee Club Island is always above sea level, and is considered permanent. It's considered the northernmost piece of land in the world entirely. The northernmost point of Canada, which is also very interesting in and of itself, is Cape Sheridan, which is the northernmost point of Ellesmere Island, which is the northernmost island in Canada as a whole. Ellesmere also contains the northernmost permanent civilian settlement, which is Grise Fjord. Population of about 127. It's the only town on Ellesmere Island. There are settlements on Ellesmere Island, but they're scientific stations. They're not for civilians. So the northernmost permanent settlement, civilian settlement in Canada is Grice Fjord. The northernmost point of land in the Russian Federation is in a series of islands called Franz Joseph Land, which is north of the central part of Siberia. This is not a northernmost, but also in the Russian Federation, and also Franz Joseph Land is off the coast of a Russian subject territory called the Sakha Republic. The capital of the Sakha Republic is also the coldest major city in the world, which is Yakutsk. Temperatures in Yakutsk have been as low as minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit, but they've also reached as high as 101 degrees Fahrenheit in July. It has the most extreme swing between lowest temperature ever and the highest temperature ever recorded. Annual all-time swing of 183 degrees Fahrenheit from highest to lowest. The other thing about the extreme situation of Yakutsk, it's the coldest settlement that can be reached by commercial air travel. The Yakutsk airport, with commercial flights to and from St. Petersburg, as well as all of the Moscow major airports. That is the coldest major settlement in the world. Also the northernmost river port in the world. The Lena River does flow around and through Yakutsk. And so that is the northernmost river port in the world, is at Yakutsk, which is, of course, during the wintertime frozen over entirely. So there are some northernmost here for you, but that is the debate of the northernmost city, town, or settlement in the world. Lots of contenders. But anyhow, that's it for tonight, guys. I'm, again, videotaping the same night. It's Monday night. Hope you had a good day. I'll see you tomorrow Tuesday. And peace out, homies.